Y'all leaving me a ride out there in a waste.
All right. Hit it,
All
buddy.
right. Are we starting this
It's
shindig
your
or what?
freestyle. Bum, bum, bum. Welcome to Re-Education Live.
Gotta
Today
get us a
we're going to
copyright
talk about...
strike.
What?
You're gonna get us a copyright strike.
That's fine. We're talking about anarchists. Take it away, Ivan.
All right, cool. So we're gonna yap about anarchism, what is, what isn't, why it's goofy, why it's sometimes not goofy, misconceptions that we see here on TikTok, and on sort of the online left in general, and our thoughts of it. This is not those in the comments or viewing. This is not a debate space. This is more or less a lecture space. We might have time for some questions at the end. But I want to start off here with a piece from Huey P. Newton. It's called Huey on Anarchists and Individualists as Related to Revolutionary Struggle and the Black Liberation Movement. I want to talk about this in particular because generally in the States, anarchism is seen a lot more favorably amongst people who call themselves radicals and by the establishment, and that's for two primary reasons. One, because anarchism inherently lacks, I'm going to, hot take, a solid political ideology. So it's very easy for people from different walks of life to sort of just kind of be like, oh yeah, I'm an anarchist, I don't believe in hierarchy or state or what have you. And the second reason why it's a lot more mainstream is because it's super easy for the FBI and CIA to infiltrate these spaces. So when we talk about revolutionary movements in the United States, arguably one of the most successful, or at least the one that had the most potential, was the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party, even if you go on Wikipedia, the most liberal website in the world, states that the Black Panthers were a Marxist-Leninist organization. And I've encountered anarchists on this app who believe the Black Panthers weren't, they were anarchists. That's simply not true. So I'm going to read this segment from this writing from Huey P. Newton that sort of dispels that. We should understand there is a difference between the rebellion of the anarchists and the Black Revolution or liberation of the Black colony. This is a class society. It always has been. This reactionary class society places its limitations on individuals, not just in terms of their occupation, but also regarding self-expression, being mobile, and being free to really be creative and do anything they want to do. The class society prevents this. This is true not only for the mass of the lower or subjugated class, but it is also true within the ruling class, the master class. The class also limits the freedom of individual souls of the people which comprise it. In the upper class, the individual always tries to free themselves from these limitations, the artificial limitations placed upon him through external sources, namely some hierarchy that goes by the name of state or government administration. In America, we have not only a class society, but we have a caste system, and Black people are fitted into the lowest caste. They have no ability for going up the class ladder. They have no privilege to enter into the ruling structure at all. Within the ruling class, there's objecting, resisting, because the people have found they're completely subjugated to the will of the administration and to the manipulators. This brings about a very strange phenomenon in America. That is, many of the rebelling white students and anarchists are the offspring of this master class. Surely most of them have a middle-class background and some even upper class. They see the limitations imposed upon them and know they're striving, as all men strive, to get freedom of the soul, freedom of expression, and freedom of movement without the artificial limitations from antique values. Blacks and colored people in America confined within the caste system are discriminated against as a whole group of people. It's not a question of individual freedom, as it is for the children in the upper classes. We haven't reached the point of trying to free ourselves individually because we're dominated and oppressed as a group of people. Part of this country, which is a great part of the youth themselves, but they're not doing this as a group of people, because as a group, they're already free to an extent. Their problem is not a group problem, really, because they can easily integrate into the structure. Potentially, they're mobile enough to do this. They're the educated ones, the future of the country, and so forth. They can easily gain a certain amount of power over the society by integrating into the rulership circle. But they see that even within the rulership circle, there is still antique value that have no respect for individualism. They find themselves subjugated. No matter what class they're in, if they find themselves subjugated because of the nature of this class society, so their fight is to free the individual soul. This brings about another problem. They're being ruled by an alien source that has nothing to do with freedom and individual expression. They want to escape this, to overturn this, but they see no need to form a structure or a real disciplined vanguard movement. Their reasoning is that by setting up a disciplined organization, they feel they'd be replacing the old structure with other limitations. They fear they'd be setting themselves up as a directing the people, therefore eliminating the individual again. But what they don't understand, or seems that they don't understand, is as long as the military-industrial complex exists, then the structures of oppression of the individual continue. An individual would be threatened even if he were to achieve his freedom he's seeking. He'll be threatened because there will be an organized loner group there ready to strip him of the individual freedom at any moment. In Cuba, they have a revolution. They had a vanguard group that was a disciplined group, and they realized that the state won't disappear until imperialism is completely wiped out. Structurally and also philosophically, or the bourgeois thought won't be changed. Once imperialism is wiped out, they can have their communist state, and the state or territorial boundaries will disappear. In this country, anarchists seem to feel as if they just express themselves individually and tend to ignore the limitations imposed on them. Without leadership and without discipline, they can oppose the very disciplined, organized, reactionary state. This is not true. They will be oppressed as long as imperialism exists. You cannot oppose a system such as this, You cannot oppose a system such as this is to oppose it with organizations that's even more extremely disciplined and dedicated than the structure you're opposing. I can understand the anarchists wanting to go directly from state to non-state, but historically it's incorrect. As far as I'm concerned, thinking of the recent French Revolution, the reason the French uprising failed is simply because the anarchists in the country, who by definition had no organization, had no people that were reliable enough as far as the mass of people were concerned to replace de Gaulle and his government. Now the people were skeptical about the Communist Party and other progressive parties because they didn't side with the people of medium living. They lagged behind the people, so they lost respect of the people, and the people looked for guidance from the students and anarchists. But the anarchists were unable to offer a structural program to replace de Gaulle's government, so the people were forced to turn back to de Gaulle. It wasn't the people's fault. It was Cohn-Bendit's fault and all other anarchists who felt they could go from state to non-state. In this country, getting back to North America now, we can side with the student radicals. We would try to encourage them and persuade them to organize and wield a sharp cutting tool. In order to do this, they would have to be disciplined. They would have at least some philosophical replacement of the system. This is not to say that it in itself will free the individual. The individual will not be free until the state does not exist at all. And I think, I don't want to be redundant, this cannot be replaced by the anarchists right away. As far as the blacks are concerned, we are not hung up on attempting to actualize or express our individual souls because we're oppressed not as individuals but as a whole group of people. Our evolution or our liberation is based first on freeing our group to a certain degree. After we gain our liberation, our people will not be free. I can imagine in the future that the blacks will rebel against the organized leadership that the blacks themselves have structured. They will see there will be limitations, limiting their individual selves, limiting their freedom of expression, but this is only after they become a free group. I'm almost done. This is what makes our group different from the white anarchist. Besides, he views his group as already free. Now he's striving for freedom of his individual self. This is the big difference. We're not fighting for freedom of our individual selves, we're fighting for a group freedom. In the future, there will probably be a rebellion where blacks will say, well, our leadership is limited, our freedom, because of the rigid discipline. Now that we've gained our freedom, we will strive for individualistic freedom that has nothing to do with organized group or state, and the group will be disorganized as it should be. But at this point, we stress discipline, we stress organization. We do not stress psychedelic drugs and all other things that have to do with just the individual expansion of the mind. We're trying to gain true liberation of a group of people. This makes our struggle somewhat different from the whites. Now, how is it the same? It's the same in the fact that both of us are striving for freedom. They will not be free. The white anarchists will not be free until we are free. So that makes our fight their fight, really. The imperialist and the bourgeois bureaucratic capitalist system will not give them individual freedom while they keep a whole group of people based upon race, color, oppressed as a group. How can they expect it to get individual freedom when the imperialists oppress whole nations of people? Until we gain liberation as a group, they won't gain any liberation as an individual person. This makes our fight the same. We must keep this in perspective as always and see the similarities and the differences in it. There's a tremendous amount of difference in it. and there's a due amount of similarities between the two cases. Both are striving for freedom, and both are striving for liberation of their people. Only one is advanced to a degree higher than the other. The anarchists are advanced a step higher, but only in theory. As far as actuality of conditions, they shouldn't be advanced higher because they should see the necessity of wiping out the imperialistic structure by organized groups just as we must organize.
Fantastic read.
Thanks, broski. My dyslexia wasn't acting up that whole time, except for when I said individualistic.
No, you did a great job. So
I'm gonna feel so bad because I also have something to read, but later.
That's all right. Let me take a sip of water real quick.
So let's talk a little bit about like what the definition of anarchism is online.
Right. So to give a little bit more context to basically what Huey was saying and the fundamental disagreements is that anarchism inherently rejects hierarchy and it rejects a state. And you can think of a state as sort of like the government, like the government of New York, the government of the United States, government of Russia, whatever. However, when communists, Marxists talk about the abolition of state, we're talking about the abolition of the state that is formed based off a class society. So if you were to remove and abolish the classes, as Marxists seek to do, you would inherently be left without a state. Does that mean that there is no government and no bureaucracy and no organized means? If the Marxist says no, but the anarchist says that all of that should be undone, and that when we overthrow the ruling class, there simply won't be anything to replace it.
And with that, like he said, then in their mind, the individual would be truly free.
Yeah, it's really difficult because of how individualist and idealist anarchism really is. Almost every anarchist is going to have a different, definition or understanding of what it means. Like,
that's ultimately what
some will say it's the truest form of democracy. Others will say it's not democracy at all. Some say that there is government, there's just no state. Some will say that there is zero government and that state and government are the same thing. It's just there's no like consensus. You know what I mean? Like they can't really figure out for themselves what it means.
Right, which sort of goes on to the whole problem that Huey is pointing out here. When you are talking about the revolution, you're talking about the overthrow of the ruling class. If you don't have an organized group of people disciplined enough to do that, then how are you going to have people who can even along the same lines define what they're talking about? Which is funny. It's kind of why we started Kollectiv Re-Education in a microcosm of trying to get people on TikTok lives to be sort of on the same page when it comes to Marxism-Leninism. Inherently, so for those who don't really know, right, there's always this underlying beef that has gone historically between the Marxist-Leninists, communists versus anarchists. I think primarily because, again, if you don't have a structured definition and discipline amongst, well, in this case, no organization, then you have people who don't even agree with the same things, like Cutie was saying. So, like, you have people who's, one person will say, I'm an anarchist, another person will say, I'm an anarchist, I'm a communist. But that first anarchist might not say that they're a communist. You see what I'm saying? So, like, they're ideologically essentially moot because they're not inherently doing anything. When it comes to, like, being able to push political program, because when you're talking about the upheaval of society, you need to understand that as much as people want to run around and LARP, you have to win the hearts and minds of people. You have to ensure that the layman, the disabled, the whoever can trust in what you're pushing. So if you're basically like, yeah, we're just gonna basically take over and then let it all kind of just fall apart because, you know, now we're all free, people who currently rely on the system today, even though it is capitalist, even though it is bourgeois, are going to say, well, I'm going to side with the bourgeois because at least I can get my medicine.
Right, and I think we've had this discussion before in other places where, like, one of the anarchists, it's not like necessarily a real position, but like an anarchist that has been interacted with when discussing like disabilities and specifically like glasses. The solution was just encountering someone that enjoys making glasses, which is not necessarily a society that you can fundamentally predict to help everyone that needs to be helped.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
You
like
didn't know that people just have, you know, the love for creating hyper complicated medicines.
Hyper complicated medicines, extremely
You
elaborate.
weren't aware that it was just a
systems.
hobby to create pharmacies for people in their own living rooms.
See, and I always like to bring this up with anarchists because, like, you two know, I'm in the medical field, so like, there's so much that's required to keep people alive. So many different kinds of machines and anything from sophisticated imaging machines all the way down to IV bags, all the way to continuous feed. I made a video about this a long time ago. A device called a piston syringe, which is basically something you use to pump medications or food into somebody who can't swallow, so it goes right into the stomach. In an anarchist society, nobody's going to be running around making those things. That's why organization is required in order to facilitate what society needs and assign, you know, I'm not going to say necessarily assign people to do that because I don't know what that government's going to look like. We're just kind of talking in speculation, but basically, if there's already systems, there's already factories in the capitalist world producing those things. If those factories and supply lines can then be turned to the new Communist Party, the systems are already there. But relying on people out of the kindness of their heart to just do that is inherently flawed, because that's why humans built society in the first place, to provide for humanity as a whole, not just their own group and not just the individual.
Yeah, societal organization didn't just appear one day. It came about through a need to improve our productive forces and make sure that as our populations grew, we could actually take care of each other. And with the anarchist line of thinking and relying on the individuals to just kind of volunteer their labor to do whatever they want, it simply would not be able to actually help the masses. And that's why it's never really taken off beyond like sort of spontaneous movements.
I do like this comment here that Huey says, but at this point we stress discipline, we stress organization, we do not stress psychedelic drugs. That just makes me laugh because, like, I've met a lot of anarchists in my hometown, and yeah, a lot of them are kind of just like, yeah, you know, yes, you're correct, you don't like cops. Yes, you're correct, you don't like unjust authority, but you're just kind of in your room smoking weed every day, instead of actually organizing. And, like, sure, we can talk about, you know, the flaws in Marxist-Leninist organization when it comes to the United States. But when we talk about the world, you know, what were the successful communist revolutions? They were Marxist-Leninists in nature.
But they just weren't good enough. They weren't ideologically pure enough, Ivan.
Oh, my be.
They didn't immediately destroy capitalism and
They
create
clearly
a
did it
utopian
wrong.
society. That's
Therefore,
the revolution.
Well, that's the thing. Is anarchism is inherently idealistic, much like liberalism. It exists in this realm that we can bring about a society right after the first round of drama is done. And the thing is, what I think the anarchists fail to understand, and even a lot of Marxist-Leninists, so-called Marxist-Leninists, fail to understand, is that just because we won the initial exchange for power doesn't mean the revolution is over. When you bring about a new society, new government, it is on you as a person who facilitated that to call out injustice, to protest, to, if you live in a society that votes, to continue the struggle in your country. Because it doesn't just mean, well, we won, now everyone go home and make, knitted hats. There's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done, especially if you're talking about a hypothetical case where perhaps the North America is balkanized in some way. Like, we're talking about decades worth of rebuilding, restructuring, and reorganizing.
I mean, I can't go home and just smoke all day after the revolution.
No, bro.
There's just like this really idealistic foundation that people will just start cooperating. Like, as soon as we, enlighten these fools and tell them that they have, they have freedom and justice now, right? That they'll be on our side. But they won't. They won't. There's this thing called reactionaries, right? There's counter-revolution that happens. And sometimes, as much as we want people to cooperate, if they're not willing to, if their cooperation depends on, continuing and maintaining a revolution, you have to force people to cooperate. You know what I mean? Like, you gotta be like, all right, man, like, I know you're not really on board with this, but like, you got to get back in the factory because we need arms
The factory has
to secure the rights that we just got for everybody. Like,
so one thing I'll say, and part of where it comes from when I've talked to anarchists, is more than a few have pointed out what happens after, say, a natural disaster. And when essentially the society collapses temporarily due to, say, like a hurricane or an earthquake, people will naturally go and try to help each other. And I've encountered more than a few anarchists that will say, see, that's what we're striving for. That's what we want, because that's what would happen. People are naturally going to help each other. And it's like, yes, they'll help each other, but a lot of times...
Well,
hold on, sorry. But a lot of times that cooperation is in waiting for more organized means of help.
Right. I think a lot of anarchists, when they read about situations that occurred in Marxist-Leninist societies like the Soviet Union, when it comes to the famines in the 20s and the 30s, they blame a lot of the errors that the Soviet government made on essentially like laissez-faire, or like people, essentially bureaucracy not working. But the thing is, we live in 2000, almost 2025 now, and that was 19 whatever. We now have the means to communicate so much more effectively. Back then, you had to essentially send a runner all the way down to Ukraine to assess the situation and then bring that message or telegram that message all the way back to Moscow. And that had to go through somebody else. When now, today, we have the technology to sit here on a TikTok live, or like we see what's happening, what the blue and white flag country is doing to Palestine. Like, we're seeing live what's happening. So the ability for a communist, socialist, Marxist-Leninist government to react to situations would be only more effective than what would you expect? A bunch of anarchists to, in their little communities, to suddenly pack in trucks and go help people out on the East Coast if they get hit by a hurricane? No, there should be a systemic, this is a silly way I was gonna say it, but a systemic system. There should be an organized system in order to mobilize forces, resources, and manpower to facilitate that, not simply relying on those people to do that. And when it comes to reactionaries, you have to imagine and you have to assume that just because the revolution has quote unquote over, that there aren't still going to be vehement disagreements between ethnic groups, culture groups, religious groups. So if Pennsylvania and New York are beefing and a big ass hurricane hits New York and now there's a bunch of anarchists in what was Pennsylvania, what are they going to do? They're going to just sit there and be like, well, fuck New York. You know what I mean? Like, you need a system that essentially mobilizes people, perhaps at some penalty, of being like, hey, like, you guys are, your job is to take care of these things, is to be a reaction force for natural disasters. Like, you're going now. You're assigned. This is your job. This is what you do. This is what you contribute to society. On a more extreme end of that, without a disciplined and organized government or vanguard, especially in a place like the United States, which is made up of multiple nations within the empire, without an organized, disciplined government in order to facilitate and ensure and peacekeep between groups, you will just have continuous fighting. You will have continuous balkanization, continuous desperation, fighting for resources, fighting between ethnic, fighting between religious lines. That is why you need an organized government to facilitate that and to facilitate education, because most people currently in the States are not educated. So how are you going to expect those people to be able to fend for themselves in an anarchist society? You won't.
There's I'm trying to right now I can't get my Discord to work, but there's a decent book. It's called Pierre Joseph Proudhon, Harbinger of Fascism, and it really goes into some pretty decent detail that one of the formative figures of anarchism, Proudhon, was an anti-Semite. He was racist, like not even like he was talking about the bankers and who controls the world and who controls the money supply and the government, and how Napoleon, gave up the political wing to the Jesuits and gave the rest of the country away to the other to Jewish people. It's like, it's crazy, and like this is where it starts. Like this is where they started from. So like it shouldn't be surprising that they're almost always incredibly chauvinistic towards other groups, and how they're never good enough. They could do it better than the other communist uprising or revolution or whatever. And it gets to the point where like even their big group of people who they like to talk about all the time as being anarchists, the EZLN, the Zapatistas, the FZLN too, they responded to an article that was complaining about the EZLN not being anarchist enough, where they basically were like, yeah, we aren't anarchists. Why do you have, like, what's the issue? Like, I can read this whole thing, but I'm probably just gonna read the beginning if you get it.
Yeah, go for
it. So it goes, and this is the header. A Zapatista response to the EZLN, or a Zapatista response to, quote, the EZLN is, all caps, not anarchist, end quote. And it begins by saying, first and foremost, it must be said that only small elements of the Frente Zapatista are willing to engage in a debate with insignificant elements along an ideological fringe. One would find even fewer warriors within the Ejército Zapatista, so the EZLN, who would be willing to engage in intangible rhetorical battles with people whose greatest virtue is spreading their lack of understanding and knowledge around in newspapers and magazines. But the article entitled, quote, the EZLN is not anarchist, end quote, reflected such a colonialist attitude of arrogant ignorance, several of us decided to write a response to you. Then they go on and say, you are right. The EZLN and its larger populous body, the FZLN, are not, all caps, anarchist. Nor do we intend to be, nor should we be. In order for us to make concrete change in our social and political structures, we cannot limit ourselves by adhering to a singular ideology. Our political and military body encompasses a wide range of belief systems from a wide range of cultures that cannot be defined under a narrow ideological microscope. There are anarchists in our midst, just as there are Catholics and communists and followers of Santeria. We are Indians in the countryside and workers in the city. We are politicians in the office and homeless children on the street. We are gay and straight, male and female, wealthy and poor. What we all have in common is a love for our families and homelands. I gotta... One second. I gotta take a sip. I'm gonna die over here. You know when you're talking, the whole room starts getting warmer and warmer?
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. I turned off the AC to do this. So when I was reading the freaking Huey P. Newton thing, I was like, damn.
Yeah.
Your ears are sweating.
What we all have in common is a love for our families and our homelands. What we all have in common is a desire to make things better for ourselves and our country. None of this can be accomplished if we are to build walls of words and abstract ideas around ourselves. And this next couple of sections is where they really start cooking anarchists. It's kind of mad. Funny. Over the past 500 years, we have been subjected to a brutal system of exploitation and degradation few in North America have ever experienced. We have been denied land and freedom since before your country was even made, and accordingly have a much different view on the world than you. We are subjected by colonial rule first by the Spanish, then by the French and Germans, and lastly by the North Americans. For centuries, Mexicans have been slaves and fodder and treated as less than human. A fact that scars us to this day, and a fact that we cannot and should not forget. Our past has made us what we are today, and in attempting to break this historical trend of exploitation, we have risen up multiple times in attempts to reclaim our humanity and better our lives. First, we thought that Juarez and Hidalgo fought with Juarez and Hidalgo against the Spanish crown. Then Zapata and Villa against the Porfiriato. Now we fight against the different faces of the same head, seeking to keep us enslaved as subhuman servants to capital. This is not a struggle that is picked up from a book or gleaned from a movie, but a struggle we all inherited the moment we were given the light of life. Bro, my vision's going crazy. Going crazy over here. Good googly moogly. Where am I at? Let me find myself again, bro. I might even start skipping this because this is, they're telling their story for this.
That's right. Take your time.
Yeah.
If you guys can, share and like the live. And welcome.
Okay, here we go. This is a struggle that is in front of all of us. Oh my gosh, bro, this is crazy. I'm gonna just start highlighting over here. This is a struggle that is in front of all our lives, even running through our blood. It is a struggle that many of our fathers and grandfathers died for, and one we ourselves are willing to die for. A struggle necessary for our people and our country. It is apparent from your condescending language and arrogant short-sightedness that you understand very little about Mexican history or Mexicans in general. We may be, quote, fundamentally reformist, end quote, and may be working for, quote, nothing concrete that could be provided for by capitalism, end quote. But rest assured that food, land, democracy, justice, and peace are terribly precious when you don't have them. Precious enough to struggle for at any cost, even at the risk of offending some comfortable people in a faraway land or in a far-off land who think their belief system is more important than basic human needs. Precious enough to work for with whatever tools we have before us, be it negotiations with the state or networking within popular culture. Our struggle was raging before anarchism was even a word, much less an ideology with newspapers and discipline. Our struggle is older than Bakunin or Kropotkin. Even though anarchists and syndicates have fought bravely with us, we are not willing to lower our history to meet some narrow ideology exported from the same countries that we fought against in our wars for independence. The struggle in Mexico, Zapatista and otherwise, is a product of our histories and cultures and cannot be bent and manipulated to fit someone else's formula, much less a formula not at all informed about our people, or our country, or our history. You are right. We, as a movement, are not anarchists. We are a people trying to control our lives and reclaim dignity that has been stolen from us from the moment Cortez came to power. And I'm going to take a break.
While Cutie recovers, Cruz, do you have any comments you want to make?
Oh, I just have this great piece from Proudhon, from one of his notebooks, dated December 26, 1847, and titled "On the Jews," in which he says, "The Jew is the enemy of humankind." So, if there's any question as to whether or not
I try not to use quotes from him because TikTok will fucking snipe me.
He said some other stuff in there that I would not say, but I wanted to specify that.
But you said that. Typical ML.
I know that one. But I feel it's short and it gets the point across pretty good.
I do appreciate you reading all the Spanish words, Cutie. That was.
I tried not to say it in aggressively I know how to say this way, but also not in a Ejerhito. You know what I mean?
Right. Okay. So, do you want to go ahead and keep reading, or you want to take another breather?
I'm gonna try to see a part where he's really cooking them. I mean, this is from the whole Easy LN, and I'm basically cutting half of this.
Okay. I can yap for a second while you.
Somebody said that we're getting feedback, so whoever's the dominant speaker, you think everybody else can mute so that it's coming through clearly.
Right. It means you, Cutie. There you go. And now my cat's meowing, so that's great. Okay, so I want to read real quick while Cutie's recouping himself. So to kind of go back a little bit more, when we talk about why anarchism is so much more mainstream in the States, it's because of the inherent lack of discipline that exists in anarchist spaces. They are ripe for the taking by the FBI. So this is from the anarchistlibrary.org. Inside the FBI entrapment strategy. Protecting ourselves, protecting each other. First, let's review the basics. Never undertake or discuss illegal activities with people you haven't met or trusted. You know what? I'm going to go down a little bit more to why entrapment and why now. Why is the FBI focusing on entrapping inexperienced young people rather than going after seasoned anarchists? Isn't that just plain bad sportsmanship? And why are they intensifying this now? For one thing, experienced activists are harder to catch. Unlike anarchists, FBI agents work for money, not necessarily out of passion or conviction. Their reports often read like second-rate homework assignments, even as they wreck people's lives. Agents get funding and promotions based on successful cases, so they have incentive to set people up. But why go after challenging targets? Why not pick the most marginal, most vulnerable, the most isolated? If the goal is simply to frame somebody, it doesn't really matter who they target. So I just want to point out real quick, even the way that this is written by anarchists is not that anything is free of flaws, but is extremely flawed because it's already adding emotions to something that should be basic operational security. And when you're talking about things like basic operational security, you should be concise and to the point. You shouldn't. There's no need to say FBI reports read like second grade homework. That doesn't serve anybody. It's like, yeah, in our own circles we can clown on the pigs all we want, but when you're writing a document like this, there's no need to do that. To me, that shows already a lack of discipline. Which, I mean, they are not disciplined because they're anarchists. Likewise, the tactics anarchists have actually been using are likely to be more popular with the general public than the tactics infiltrators pushed in towards. Smashing bank windows, for example, may be illegal, but it is increasingly understood as a meaningful political statement. It would be difficult to build a conveying terrorism case around broken glass. Well-known activists also have a much broader support network. The FBI threatened Daniel McGowan with a mandatory life sentence plus 335 years in prison. Widespread support enabled him to obtain a good lawyer, and the prosecution had to settle for a plea bargain for a 7-year sentence or else admit to engaging in illegal wiretapping. Going after disconnected young people dramatically decreases the resources to be immobilized to support them. If the point is to set precedents that criminalize anarchism while producing a minimal blowback, then it is easier to manufacture terror cases by means of agents provocateurs than to investigate actual anarchist activities. How to destroy a movement. As we saw in the Green Scare, FBI repression often does not begin in earnest until a movement has begun to fracture and subside, dismissing the target's support base. The life cycle of movement passes ever faster in our hyper-mediatized era. The Occupy phenomenon peaked in November 2011 and has already slowed down. As anarchist values practices become increasingly central to protest movements, the authorities are anxious to encapsulate and delegitimize anarchists, yet in context it's still inconvenient to admit to targeting people for anarchism alone. That could spread the wrong narrative. Railing outrage against transparency, political persecution, likewise, they dare not initiate repression without a narrative portraying the targets as alien to the rest of the movement, even if that repression is calculated to destroy the movement itself. Fortunately for the FBI, a few advocates of nonviolence within the Occupy movement were happy to provide this narrative, disavowing everyone who didn't affirm their narrow tactical framework. Journalists like Chris Hedges took this further by framing the Black Bloc as a kind of people rather than tactics, despite even the Chicago Sun-Times comprehending the distinction. Hedges led the charge to consign those who actively defended themselves against state repression to this fabricated political category, in an effort to designate them legitimate targets. It is no coincidence the entrapment cases fall soon after. So, right. Here, it says, essentially, that there was anarchists who were not in agreement with tactics that were occurring on the ground. And that opened these people to then speak to the FBI, and now led to the the media now disavowing Black Bloc. Now that goes to the normies and the liberals at home watching TV who get scared of this stuff because they don't understand what's happening, and now they're going to become reactionary. Now they're going to be against the anarchists by default. And if they're against the anarchists, they're sure as hell going to be against the communists. So you see how even in this moment, the FBI doesn't even necessarily have to do that much work. In a Marxist-Leninist organization, I'm not going to get super specific in the detail because I don't know who'll get sniped. But if you understand, how PSO or FRSO is organized, you would understand that a lot of it is based on need to know information. And a lot of organization is based off an inherent unified front of tactics and political talking points. If you do not have a disciplined group of people who can do that, you open yourselves up to the FBI just walking right in the door and shutting the whole thing down. Or effectively making your group defunct, or turn them even against other communist movements, which have happened in the past. Are you ready, Cutie?
Yeah. I had those plain pretzels just now, actually. They were kind of garbage, but they probably would have tasted good on the plane. Again, for people who are now coming in well after I was reading this, I was reading a section from basically the Zapatistas responding to something where anarchists were complaining about how the Zapatistas were not anarchist enough.
Right.
And they're saying essentially that they aren't anarchists, and they're kind of clowning on them. Low-key giving them like a history lesson in the middle of clowning them, which is kind of funny to me. So they go, in fighting for these ends, we must do what is most effective for us, for all of us, without succumbing to the temptation of being divided into small little groups that are more easily purchased by those keeping us enslaved. We learned this lesson from La Malinche as she helped Cortez divide 30 million Mexicans up into easily conquered groups of feuding bodies. We learned this lesson from the post-independence reign of Porfiriato and from the post-revolutionary betrayal at the hands of the rich powers. We see narrow-minded ideologies like anarchism and trigger warning communism as tools to pull apart Mexicans into more easily exploitable groups. Rather than facing our enemies as groups that can be turned against each other, we prefer to work together as a common people with a common goal. Your article used the word, quote, compromise, end quote, as though it were profanity. For us, it is the glue that holds us all together in common struggle. Without these compromises that allow us to work together, we would be nowhere. Lonely slaves waiting for the exploited, lonely slaves waiting to be exploited just as we have been in the past. We will not be bought off this time. We will not allow ourselves to be treated as particulars and accept favors from the powers that harvest wealth from our misfortune. And as we are doing things right now, it is working. 60 million people signed petitions to stop the war in Chiapas. Zapatismo is alive again. We are cells in every town, in every state, all across the country, made up of people from all over the demographic spectrum. I scrolled down too far, I lost it. There we go. We are organized. We are powerful. We will succeed in our fight simply because we are too large and too well organized to be ignored or quashed by the powers. What we have may not be perfect. It may not be ideal. But it is working for us for now, in a very much visible fashion, and the familiar old face of colonialism shining through your good intentions. Oh, good googly movie. I skipped a whole section here. My bad. Not a section, but a line. And we wouldn't hesitate to say that if you were in our position, you would be doing the same. But what really enraged us about your article was the familiar old face of colonialism shining through your good intentions. Lots of North Americans come to Mexico and turn up their nose at our food, our lifestyles, claiming that we are not as good as things they have, quote, back home, end quote. The author of your article does the same thing in his, quote, critiques, end quote, of Zapatismo. If these, quote, critiques had included a detailed discussion on our tactics with reference to our history and current positions in the world, it wouldn't have been a big deal. Nothing that we don't do constantly within our own organizations. But the fact that he just slagged Zapatismo off as being a vanguard of reformist nationalists without even a touch of analysis on, all caps, why this is, illustrates that once again we Mexicans are not as good as the all-knowing North American imperialist who thinks himself more intelligent and more sophisticated politically than the dumb Mexican. This attitude, though hidden behind thin veils of objectivity, is the same attitude that we have been doing with for 500 years, where someone else in some other country from some other culture thinks they know what is best for us more than we do ourselves. Even more disgusting to us was the line, quote, "The question of revolutionary solidarity in these struggles is, therefore, the question on how to intervene in a way that is fitting with one's aims, in a way that moves one's revolutionary anarchist project forward," end quote. It would be difficult for us to design a more concise list of colonial words and attitudes than those used in this sentence. Quote, "intervene one's project forward," end quote. Mexicans have a very well developed understanding of what intervention entails. Try looking up Conquista and Villa Hermosa and Tejas and Maximilian in a history book for even a small glimpse of what we see when North Americans start talking about, quote, intervention. But once again, the anarchists in North America know better than us about how to wage struggle we have been engaged in since 300 years before their country was founded, and can therefore even think about using us as a means to, quote, advance their project, end quote. That is the same exact attitude capitalists and empires have been using to exploit and degrade Mexico and the rest of the Third World for the past 500 years. Even though this article talks about revolution, the attitudes and ideals held by the author are no different than those held by Cortez, Monroe, or any other corporate imperialist schmaster you can think of. Your intervention is not wanted, nor are we, quote, a project, end quote. For some high-minded North Americans or any other corporate imperialist for some high-minded Americans to profit off of. The author talks much about revolutionary solidarity without ever defining the term. What does revolutionary solidarity mean to him? From the attitude of this article, it is apparent that revolutionary solidarity is more or less the same thing to him as profit margins and cost-benefit analyses are to corporate imperialists. Ways to use someone else for one's own gain. So long as North American anarchists hold and espouse colonialist belief systems, they will forever find themselves without allies in the Third World. The peasants in Bolivia and Ecuador, no matter how closely in conformity with your rigid ideology, will not appreciate your condescending colonial attitudes any more than would the freedom fighters in Papua New Guinea or anywhere else in the world. Colonialism, and we're just about done, colonialism is one of the many enemies we are fighting in this world, and so long as North Americans reinforce colonial thought patterns in their, quote, revolutionary struggles, they will never be on the same side of any anti-colonial struggle anywhere. We in the Zapatista struggle have never asked anyone for unflinching, uncritical support. What we have asked the world to do is respect the historical context we are in and think about the actions we do to pull ourselves from under the boots of oppression. At the same time, you should be looking at your own struggles in your own country and seeing the commonalities we have between us. This is the only way we have to make a global revolution. And then that's how they ended. For this section, they had there's an appendix, but
yeah,
more text.
No, I think very good piece. Yeah, so I, as a brown man, have encountered many anarchists who not only are more individualistic than they realize, there we go, but also exude racism in their arrogance that they believe that they know what is right for different societies. Especially, like I said, the United States is a nation of is an empire of different nations that each have their own ethnic, cultural, religious, racial backgrounds, and not everybody's going to agree with, okay, let's just be anarchists. So I wanted to bring up the example of South Africa's economic freedom fighters. Is a black nationalist communist political party in South Africa with over 1 million members. Like, that is so much more support than we've seen anywhere in the West for communism. So is it that those people, those million Africans, are they just too shrimp brained to understand that anarchism is the way to go? Or perhaps they actually live in those conditions where hypercapitalism has taken over, where imperialism sucks resources away from their country and are like, no, we need a government that will facilitate that redistribution of our resources back to ourselves.
Nah, they just need to be, you know, as enlightened as us American anarchists. You know what I mean?
Right. All right, so we're getting close to an hour already. Cruz, you got anything on the dome?
Nothing in particular, not more than what's really already been said. There's just tons and tons of examples that we could go over. We could be here for weeks giving examples of how anarchism...
Set up your tents, everybody.
Right.
Set up your tents, light
Yeah,
the fire.
we're doing it.
S'mores.
We're really doing this.
Every historical example. But one thing I will say, in sort of the, like, there's always been sort of beef between anarchists and Marxists historically. And one thing that anarchists have done when in straight discussions with, say, Marxists, when Marxists hit with the only successful revolutions, or the most recent like successful revolutions, have been Marxist-Leninist by nature, anarchists will then attribute, and we discussed this a little bit with the Black Panthers, they will attribute anarchism to just other groups, other movements, and say like, oh, well, this was successful, it was anarchist. And that's just, you've both given great examples of how that's happened in Mexico, how it's happened in France, and how it's happened in various other places. But that they go back, like well back in human history, and say, well, that was anarchist, and that's why we're smart.
It's so tokenizing, because they're always like, you like, this is my critique of you know, Marx and Engels, and also of, you know, other Marxists, right? When, you know, they bring up an indigenous society and they're like, they're communists, they're, you know, primitive communists, right? And it's like, no, they're not, bro. They are not communists. Like, yes, economically, they don't really have like a structure that is similar to capitalism. Like, if you had to like pick capitalism or communism that it's closer to communism. But like, that's such a useless binary, because when you're describing an indigenous society, first of all, they're not a monolith. Not every indigenous society is identical. And you know, anarchists do the same thing. They look at a society and they go, they're communist. They're communist. Look, it's been done before, and they did it right. Not like the USSR, who did it bad. Like,
right.
What do you mean, bro? What do you mean? Like, you want to return, like no disrespect to indigenous societies of, you know, fucking ancient times, but like, what do you, what, like, do they want to return to like a state where there's literally no industry? Like,
return to monkeys.
I believe
where food isn't, you know, industrialized, and, you know, quite literally creating a situation where billions of people starve because there's not enough food production. Like, what is wrong with these people?
I think that's the sorry, Chris, and then I'll let you go.
Yeah.
But like, it's just, I think you just hit the nail on the head, how they don't think these things through. Because like, the Western anarchist in the United States, yes, the United States has a malnutrition problem, but the United States is generally one of the places where, even if you're eating 7-Eleven glizzy, you ate something that day. It takes only a few days for people to go bananas when there's no food. And like, I don't think the anarchists have thought that through. That's why society developed in order to feed people on a regular basis, because we were not doing that before.
So, I have something I would like to read real quick. It's extremely short, but it's in.
It better be.
It's gonna be in one of the most common retorts to any anarchist, which has been, "Have you read On Authority?" by Engels. And in it, to add to Cutie's point, he wrote, "Wanting to abolish authority in large-scale industry is tantamount to wanting to abolish industry itself, to destroy the power loom in order to return to the spinning wheel." And that's essentially what's happening there. It's by getting rid of all the hierarchy, the organizational structure, it's taking us back to a time before the productive forces were developed to actually sustain a society as large as ours.
But going back to the concept of what the hell is it called? Primitive communism, right? No, they're not communists because the conditions for communism to have arose are not in this instance. That is anti-material, anti-Marxist, and again, without material thinking and analysis of the world, you will not build a political program that is justified in its own existence.
Exactly.
Like,
So how do we...
like a hunter-gatherer society is not like post scarcity. Like, they're in the midst of day-to-day scarcity.
Why do you think they're
level
hunting and
that
gathering?
Arguably, nobody understands. You know what I mean? Like,
They are a mid-scarcity society.
Like, I don't know, Unga hopefully will get a deer today, or we're eating berries and we'll run out of berries tomorrow. So, you know what I mean? Like, it's just not something that, I don't know. They're just goofy. But, all right, so I'll say this because I think we're getting closer to closing, and I think Aria wants to say something too. So, like, if you're an anarchist, read. Because you will see that there is a lot of flaws in your so-called ideology. Take it away, Aria.
Yeah, give them some suggestions.
take it away, Aria.
What do we want them to read? You guys give some suggestions, please.
On Authority by Frederick Engels.
And you can check out Compañero Cruz reading that on Kollectiv TV YouTube.
It's true, I did do that.
So if you
and
don't
the
read
other
it,
one would
just
be
wanna listen.
Anarchism or Socialism by Joseph Stalin.
I know, very icky. Joseph Stalin. You, that's Stalin.
I would also read
million bajillion.
JR.
I would also read the what the hell is it called? Oh my god! Now I'm a poser. The National Question by Stalin, because you can apply a lot of that to the conditions of the United States between racial and ethnic lines within the jailhouse of nations that we call it, and you will see in an anarchist society, if you apply that logic to that situation, you are going to have endless balkanization and racial and religious pogroms.
Just curious, because I had to go AFK for a second. Did we define spontaneous revolution
No.
for people, for the babies? Do you think we need to?
No.
All right. Anybody? Are we doing
I don't think
questions?
it's something that really gets brought up. I mean, it's so explanatory. It's just like people's conception of, you know, a spontaneous revolution is that it just kind of like pops up out of nowhere, you know, and it really doesn't recognize the material conditions which cause said revolution to occur. And if you understand the material conditions of the society in which that revolution has occurred, you'd understand that it's really not that spontaneous.
Yep. Are we doing questions? What do you guys feel? What's the vibes?
Do we have any questions?
Sure.
You guys got questions? I'm talking about, do people want to come up?
Anyone want to come up? Put your name in now.
Put your name in the hat.
Look at this chunky boy.
I know. Derailing the whole life with that cute kitty.
There's so much cat.
Cutie, I think they're saying what I said when I said, if you're an anarchist, read. And they took that a little personalized.
Yeah, I mean, I think they definitely do read, because the ones that annoy me the most are the ones that are only anarchist stuff. They're just like, well, actually, I thought of that, and did you know that? They'll just figure it out.
Actually, I'm an anarchist because I read all 3 volumes of
Doesn't look like anybody has questions, so you guys win. Any closing
Give us
statements?
questions before it's over.
Typical Marxist-Leninist W.
Defeated before we even get
They were like, these guys cooked. I don't know.
Any
Listen, all right. Even if it's like you think it's a dumb question or whatever, it's not. Just ask.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you want to yell at us. If you want to
Ask
yell
a
at us
question.
too, that's also acceptable.
Yeah.
They're waiting for dessert, bro, because you guys already cooked.
That's what the cat was.
You know what I mean?
That was
Yep.
Conrad
All right.
email.
All right. I don't think anyone's coming. So.
Oh, someone wants to know if there's any
Let's
worthwhile
go.
anarchist theory worth reading.
Untwisted Bread is decent
Yeah.
by Kraken, but it's not like it's not 10 out of 10. Also, what Rick said, Grader is good. Not always decent.
Not the growl of victory.
I like yours, Cruz. Make yours a little bit more angry though. All right. This is
All right, well, we're done. That wraps it up. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks, and enjoy your coffee.
Thanks, Dad.
See ya.